Full-time faculty, where we are today, we hired 42 in fall 14-15, and that generated a total percent of 38% diversity. Then again in fall, just this fall, we finished hiring 36 faculty members, and that moved us up 1% to 39%. And at this point, we have a total of 337 full-time faculty members. Looking at our part-time faculty diversity, in 14-15, we were at 38%. We had 913 at that point. Today, currently, fall 2015, we inched down 1% to 37%, and we're down to 762 part-time faculty members. Let's take a look at the applicant pools and what they look like in terms of diversity and numbers. You can see, looking at the 14-15 in terms of the management recruitments, we brought in a total in 14-15 60% diverse applicant pool. Out of that, we hired 36% diverse. And then for fall 2015, where we hired 5 more, they came in at the applicant pool was 52% diverse, and we hired a 40% diverse group. And of course, as I mentioned, we have a total of 53% diversity in management employees. Looking at the classified, in 14-15, we had a 72% diverse applicant pool, and of that, we hired 63% diverse. And then more recently in fall, we had a 68% diverse applicant pool and hired 67. So those numbers align fairly decently. Full-time faculty recruitments. As you can see, we had quite a number, and we had an applicant pool of, in 14-15, of 46%, which resulted in a 43% diverse hiring rate. And then for fall, this latest group of folks that we hired 36. The applicant pool was 57%, and we hired 46% diverse employees. Part-time, you can see how many applicants we receive in that arena. The part-time faculty pool for 14-15 was 63% diverse, and we hired 44% for diversity. And then more recently for fall, the applicant pool was 64% diverse, and we hired 40% diverse part-timers. So just looking overall at our different groups, our management classified full-time faculty and part-time faculty, you can see the bottom number there, what the percent of diversity looks like within those groups. Management at 53%, classified 59%, full-time faculty 39%, and part-time faculty 37%. So one of the initiatives that we have continued to work toward is to create that pipeline of faculty interns. And so we've had this program going since 2010, so we're approximately 5 years down the line now. We've had 31 program graduates. Out of the 31 interns, 71% have been diverse. Out of that group, we have hired 55% of them as part-time faculty, and out of that group, another 71% of them were diverse. So this is the group that we're looking at to help create a pipeline of diverse faculty members. And this year's group that we have on board includes Francesca Chaboya in history. And I want to thank her mentor, Dr. Stephen Wallach, who is working with her as the master teacher. We also have Kevin Warren in sheet metal, and we'd like to thank Tim Shoemaker for taking on the honor of working with Kevin. Melissa O'Malley, also in history, and again, Dr. Stephen Wallach is serving as her mentor. Catherine King in English, her mentor is Kirsten Moreno. Melissa Archibald in history, her mentor is David Lehman. Paloma Hernandez in history, and her mentor, again, is Dr. Stephen Wallach. Tara de la Cruz in sociology, and her mentor is Janae Hun. Thank you, Janae. And that concludes my presentation. Are there any questions?
Questions from the board with regard to the diversity presentation?
Just a quick question. I noticed that in terms of the Native American category, it seems like we need to do a better job of hiring. The pool is there, but we need to, I guess, improve on the hiring for Native Americans.
Yes.
Any other comments or questions? I thought it was a great report and a lot of good information.
Yeah.
Moving.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay, then we will move on to agenda item 4.1, which are the recommendations from the Board of Trustees Ad Hoc Committee for communicating with the Long Beach Community College District constituencies. The Board of Trustees has been interested in the subject of communications and campus communications for a long time now. And in fact, last year, the board adopted a specific goal that had to do with communication among campus stakeholders. And then last year, there was a communications study, that was done, came out eventually in this 3-ring binder. There were a broad survey of internal and external stakeholders to review the effectiveness of college communications, and we also conducted a survey of local residents to assess the general community knowledge about Long Beach City College and the community attitudes towards the college. As a result, this strategic communications plan was prepared, was presented to the board last April. But because of the abiding interest of the board in the subject of communications, the board in February of 2015 formed an ad hoc committee to investigate communications and see whether there might be recommendations that we could make to improve communications both to the external community and within the campus community itself. The ad hoc committee recently finished its report. It focused on 2 areas for review: trustee communications with the community, meaning the external community, and trustee protocols for training, meetings, and communications with college constituent groups. With regard to trustee communications with the community, we talked about ways that communicating could be done and made specific recommendations regarding the web, emails, the e-newsletter that goes out at this time, social media, media in general, community meetings, and then we considered live streaming of board meetings. Under the area of trustee protocols for training, meetings, and communications with college constituent groups, we discussed recommendations for new trustee orientation, training, meeting preparation, interactions with internal constituent groups, standards of conduct, and board minutes. In addition, there was an appendix to the report, which were social media guidelines for trustees. The report itself, the Trustees Ad Hoc Committee on Communications report to the Board of Trustees, is available on board docs for anybody in the campus community to see. And I wanted to talk about just a minute the process that we are going through with this report. Tonight, we're just sort of presenting the report and the recommendations. Then after the community becomes familiar with what the report and its recommendations are, the board meeting on December 8th, we will decide which recommendations to adopt. That will be an action item. We will see if there are any policy changes that would need to be set forth at that meeting for a first reading. And then in January, on January 26th, there would be a second reading and if there were any policy changes that needed to be done, and that would also be an action item. So there'll be plenty of opportunity for people to respond to the recommendations of the board. I ask everyone to familiarize themselves with what it is that the recommendations are, and we hope to have a robust discussion of these recommendations. And so with that brief introduction, I would since we're not taking any actions tonight, I would just invite comments from members of the board and anyone that has any ideas.
I have questions, but
Trustee Zia.
I have questions, but I believe Trustee Archuleta had her hand up first. So if you want to, okay. Well, thank you so much for bringing this forward, President Otto and Trustee Archuleta. I appreciate this. It provides some guidelines, but I just want to go over some of the comments that I have. I view some of the recommendations, many of the recommendations, as good. You know, the website content and new trustee orientation, ongoing training, etc. I do have few concerns, however, and I just want to preface that these concerns are by no way implying a weakness in motive or character of the presenting committee members. They're just merely my perspective and concerns with the suggested language by the authors. Second, I want to make sure I understand, and I think you spoke to it, President Otto, a little bit, because there's conflicting language in the document. On in one area, it refers to it as guideline. On the other, and when it comes to the recommendation to amend the appendix for social media, it refers to it as upon approval and acceptance of this. These recommendations, that it implies that staff will go ahead and make the necessary changes to all pertinent administrative regulations. So I just want to make sure that we go through the process, and it seems that we are based on your description. But there's a few points that I have serious concerns with from the perspective of an infringement of our First Amendment constitutional rights as citizens and elected officials. And the issues are really with the broad-based language that may have real or perceived implication of unfair labor practices. And would like to see if a legal opinion from our district council was obtained, and if not, if we should obtain it, especially since there is reference to use as a guideline, as I mentioned, and it may turn into a policy. So the document, having said that, I'm going to start off with my points. The document starts off by referencing the 2014, in the second paragraph, accreditation report, and narrows down to the scope of work of communications with the community and college constituents. It's a little bit unclear because one can infer that was the recommendation of the accreditation team, and that was not indeed the case. It was just something we chose to do. The accreditation team really didn't address these 2 points. It was more for the internal stakeholders. So just don't want it to be misconstrued by the reader. And I would suggest that we clarify it. Page 3, some of the activities listed, such as community meetings within trustee areas and e-newsletter highlighting actions by Board of Trustees. It may sound almost overtly political, or maybe susceptible to being political, especially as we enter into an election year. So I'd like to understand how the content will be managed, and if there's a way we can enhance it to address use of this material, and whether or not it will come before us for approval. And I also like to understand when this medium would be released if it were to be approved. So that's one.
I'm a little confused. This is about community meetings, and you're talking about what goes on at community meetings?
No, I'm speaking to the content that will be distributed.
At the community meetings? You said
there's a couple of items that it refers to. One is e-newsletter and that will be distributed to the community, and then also the community meetings. So I just want to make sure that we manage the process so it doesn't become political, especially in election years. And there's also reference made throughout the document to college issue, business or college business or college related. So I'd like to get more clarity on what that means, what that entails. We should just get more clarification. We should define what it means rather than leave it so open and subject to interpretation.
Well, I think that the report to the board, which we all get, the idea behind the newsletter was to repurpose this, and this just has informational material about what's going on at the college. And instead of having limited distribution, we could use the content from that to develop a monthly e-newsletter to help community members and neighborhood leaders stay informed about and connected to the college. Are you suggesting some kind of way of monitoring the content of that?
I just want to make sure it's not used to highlight specific trustees that are up for election, because it states highlighting actions by Board of Trustees. So I just want to make sure we manage that we're not really coming across as political or signaling a position. But that's one item that I have. I have other items. If I may finish what my questions are, or if you want to address it one by one. I don't know how you want to go about this, because I have.
I don't know about other ones, but with regard to the e-newsletter and community meetings, we have a professional communications staff. I think they do a pretty good job. They know that that any reports can't be directed for political purposes, and I trust them to prevent that from happening, as they have done historically. I don't know of any criticisms of the people that put together these reports that they're one-sided or political.
I'm asking the question on how we're going to manage it. I'm not insinuating that that is the case. I'm just asking the question how the content will be managed. Since this is the first time we're going to be doing this. We do that with the port. It's very effective, but we don't have an elected body. So I just want to caution us to be mindful of, that it doesn't get used for political purposes, or it's on the district's dime potentially for that reason. It's just a question. Now, I'm sure we're going to vet this out as we go through the process.
Are you suggesting that the board in some way have to approve these reports before they're sent out?
I'm asking how will we go about approving the content?
I don't think the board will approve the content, or it's intended that it would improve the content. We have professional staff that would do that. I think if somebody has an objection, they can raise that, but absent some criticism of the way that we've done things and are doing things, I subscribe to that philosophy of if it's not broke, don't fix it.
Well, we certainly have different philosophies, and it's okay. It's just the perspective. I'm more preventative, just to make sure that we don't get ourselves in a pickle or in a bind by the reader. So,
Trustee Archuleta had a comment.
Yeah, if I could just make a comment. I think that these items that are listed here, these are just recommendations in terms of viable options that we have to communicate. And again, these are just recommendations. They're not set in concrete. And I think part of the process that we're going through today is to present this. And I think ideally what would be helpful is if now that you have the document, if we could receive whatever comments and your recommendations, if those could be provided in writing, and this way we could incorporate those ideas. But I don't think that we are implying that we as trustees are going to have access to these items and we're going to then be responsible for the content. I think the staff are going to be responsible for that. We're not going to be utilizing these for any particular or specific purpose, but particularly
Okay.
political purpose.
Well, that's what I want to make sure we confirm, because it doesn't speak to it. It just may carry that someone may infer or read into it. Is just trying to safeguard the district, and I'm presenting my suggestions and perspective, not on the basis that there's something wrong, but it's just an observation from the document that I've noticed. And again, my item regarding the question of, we refer to college issue and college business and or college related. We may need to enhance that and speak to what that means, just so there's clarity for the users and the public. And I will certainly submit my points to you and Trustee Otto, Trustee Archuleta, but I want to present it tonight for the benefit of the public who are not here and are going to be reading it at a later time, and for the people who are here. The page 3 references live streaming of board meetings. The third sentence states that the committee couldn't find an example of another community college that currently broadcasts meetings live. I'd just like to point out that that's not correct. South Orange County Community College District broadcasts their meetings live and their trustee travel expenditures online as well. And I would suggest that we do the same in the spirit of placing the highest value on openness, transparency, and community trust, as the opening sentence of this document declares. I would suggest we do that. And then furthermore, I'd like to understand the source and the basis for the cost of $145,000 for these services, since earlier there was a citation that there were no examples found. So what is that number based on? The same page, I believe, page 3, as far as the media is concerned, I think this is these provisions can be quite problematic, and the trustee, I believe trustees should be free to communicate with the media without involving the superintendent and president, so long as the trustees make it clear that they are speaking on their own behalf, not on behalf of the board or the college. Perhaps this provision could be modified to state that trustees may notify the superintendent, president, but to make the requirement seems like an unreasonable restriction on trustees' First Amendment right and the ability to communicate with the media. And then the same vein, page 4 and 5, meeting preparation and board minutes. You know, I really understand the desire to streamline the board meetings, and I've suggested in the past that we, as trustees, we should be able to ask questions. It is our role, oversight role, but if we could really save some time if the questions and answers in the allotted time that we have. And I do want to point out the proposed time, the suggested time that you have is 48 hours after the posting of the agenda, which sometimes comes out on Friday afternoon. So I just want to make sure I clearly understand. Are you suggesting that the trustees communicate by Sunday in the weekend and staff will get to it on Monday? Is that the intent? Because I've gotten quite a bit of criticism for communicating over the weekend, and you know that hey, staff don't work on the weekend, and I understand that, but in an effort to provide an opportunity for them to have enough time, I just want to get clarity a little bit on what that entails. But more than anything, trustees should be permitted to make comments and ask questions at the board meeting, regardless of whether they notified the superintendent, president in advance. The last sentence of that page, on page 4, implies that if questions are not presented within the recommended timeline, that they may not get answered. So I just want to make sure that that's not the case, and that's not the intent of that sentence.
Sure. I'll tell you what the intent of the sentence is. It's just that the superintendent president needs an opportunity to be able to respond, and if he doesn't get the questions in enough time to respond because of everything that's going on. He may not be able to respond, but there's nothing here that says that any trustee can't ask whatever questions he or she wants at a board meeting, including the questions that he or she has submitted and gotten answers to. I mean, that you can still ask those questions again. I mean, I'll give you an example. I spent 30, 40 minutes on the phone today with Vice President Gable asking lots and lots of questions about stuff from the consent calendar, and I understand a lot better what some of those things are, and I do that on a regular basis, I think she'll tell you. And so you can always ask whatever questions you want. All this says, this last sentence says, is that if the superintendent doesn't have time to provide answers ahead of the meeting, that he doesn't have to get them, he doesn't have to provide you with that information, but it doesn't mean that you can't ask those questions. It just means that he might not be able to get back to you in time. Sometimes we get questions, within an hour or two of the meeting, and it would be literally impossible to provide feedback, to do the research and get back to somebody, but those questions are always can be asked publicly.
Well, I appreciate you clarifying that. And the reason I bring it up is that earlier in the paragraph, it cites that the purpose of this procedure is to streamline and in an effort to make sure that there's the clarification of the agenda items, not take time unnecessarily, the board time during meetings. So it's a little bit, I just want to make sure that there's a clear understanding that, trustees should be able to ask the questions at the board meeting. And, frankly, I think if we can get our questions and answers in within that 48 hours, if we can just amend it to the meetings, there is no need to ask the questions. I certainly don't need to ask it again because the public is going to view that in the minutes. The public that may not necessarily know what the questions may be or what to ask for, because a lot of it, the items that we have in our dockets are not seemingly understandable to the public. So that's really where I'm coming from. It's a different perspective, but I believe that we need to really sunshine a lot of these issues, but I would certainly not take any time and unnecessary time to ask those questions if they were appended to the minutes.
But the problem with that, I think, and maybe our board secretary can help us out on this, but I think that if it doesn't happen at the meeting, it's not supposed to be included in the minutes, because then it's not the minutes of the meeting, it's minutes of what's going on all over the campus, and I don't think that fits the definition of what meeting minutes are.
Well, I just want to make sure I'm clear. But if we are presenting questions and answers within 48 hours of the agenda, which is typically the Friday before the Tuesday meeting, so that's within the 72-hour timeline of that the Brown Act is in it triggers the Brown Act. So if the communication were to happen at that time, by law we have to distribute it to the public. So regardless, we have to provide the questions and answers. My point is, rather than just providing printouts for the public that can attend our meetings, we could just simply amend it to the printouts or to the minutes that we have in the subsequent meeting. That way, it will really make our meetings more expeditious. I wouldn't feel guilty that I'm the one who's asking all these questions and maybe coming across as unnecessarily taking up the board's time. I hope that makes the distinction.
But I'm not sure that gives the board who is considering these questions an opportunity to discuss them and to participate in that. It's just additional material that would have to then be maybe brought up at another board meeting. And I'll use the example of talking to Vice President Gable today for a long time and getting clarification on a lot of things that I just didn't understand. There were still some things that I want to know more about, but what happens at the meeting is what is the actions that are taken at the meetings, not what people say. Board Secretary, can you help us out here, Jack?
Yeah, I
Ms.
just
Hahn?
want to clarify. You're actually talking about two different things.
Exactly.
When you talk about bringing additional questions with the responses from the VPs to the meeting, sure, if they're in time, we can share them, but that has nothing to do with the action. It doesn't change the recommendation. So that recommendation is what goes in the minutes and the vote on that. There's no need to append or attach anything. The only thing that goes back to the official minutes is, say, like a resolution, because that language is not listed in the item itself in the recommendation, so that a signed resolution would be attached to the back of the official minutes. But we don't need to add any other dialogue or questions or bullet points of items or anything. The recommendation is there. That's what gets recorded in the minutes, and that's what we're trying to stay with.
Okay, so
Recorded.
I want to make it clear that when a trustee has questions, and it is, if it's within the 48 hours from the typical practice that we had, it is going to be within the 72 hours of the Brown Act. Therefore, we have to submit it to the public.